Chess has many homes. It was born in India, refined in Persia, and spread across the globe like a tenacious vine. But in Russia, it found more than just fertile soil. It found its center of gravity. For centuries, the chess world has tilted on a Russian axis. The grandmasters who defined eras, the theories that reshaped the game, the political dramas that held the world captive. The story always seems to lead back to Moscow, or St. Petersburg, or a quiet dacha outside the city. We all know the most famous chapter, the Soviet Union, and its state-sponsored production line of genius. A Cold War machine built to prove intellectual supremacy over 64 squares. And that machine wasn't built on empty ground. It was constructed on a foundation of centuries of quiet obsession. The real question isn't just how the Soviets became so dominant, it's why it was Russia in the first place. To understand the machine, you first have to understand the ghost that haunted it. Our story begins around the 9th century. Chess, then called shatranj, arrived with merchants from the east. The Russian name itself, shakhmati, is a direct echo of the Persian Shah Mat. The king is dead. For centuries, it was a quiet, aristocratic hobby. The Tsars had a soft spot for it. There's a wonderfully ironic legend that Ivan the Terrible, a man who officially banned chess in 1551, died in 1584 while setting up the pieces for a game. Peter the Great carried a board on military campaigns. Catherine the Great, a player herself, famously owned the Mechanical Turk, the world's most famous and fraudulent chess-playing automaton. Owning the 18th century equivalent of a chess supercomputer was a serious power move. But this was all just a game. It took until the 19th century for Russia to produce its first real chess thinkers, like Alexander Petrov, who wrote the first serious Russian-language chess manual in 1824 and gave his name to the famous Petrov's defense. And then came Mikhail Chigorin, the father of Russian chess. Chigorin was the real deal, a world-class player who twice challenged for the world championship. More importantly, he was a promoter. He started chess magazines, founded clubs, and tried with all his might to build a real chess culture. And he mostly failed. His magazines struggled. The clubs were small, elite gatherings. The raw material was there, a deep, popular love for the game, but the machine to process it hadn't been invented yet. Then, in 1917, everything changed. The Bolsheviks who seized power didn't embrace chess out of love for its beauty. They embraced it because they saw its use. Vladimir Lenin was a keen player, but the true architect of the Soviet chess machine was a man named Nikolai Krylenko. As head of the Soviet Sports Committee, Krylenko saw chess not as a game, but as a tool, a political weapon. In 1924, he declared, quote, "We must organize shock brigades of chess players and begin immediately a 5-year plan for chess." A 5-year plan for chess. The logic was ruthlessly Soviet. First, it's an intellectual gymnasium. Chess teaches strategy, patience, and foresight, excellent qualities for a Red Army soldier. As early as 1920, chess was part of military pre-draft training. Second, it's an ideological proving ground. Victory on the chessboard against the West would be proof of the superiority of the socialist mind. Every checkmate was a small victory for communism. And third, it's cheap mass culture. The state put its full weight behind the slogan, "Chess to the masses." The crown jewels of this effort were the pioneer palaces, youth centers where millions of children received free, high-level chess instruction. This was the machine, and the results were staggering. First came Mikhail Botvinnik, the patriarch. An engineer by training, he was the perfect Soviet champion, disciplined, scientific, and logical. He became the first world champion produced entirely by the Soviet system in 1948. Then the machine produced Mikhail Tal, the magician from Riga. Tal was the system's beautiful glitch, a chain-smoking, electrifying genius who played with a chaotic, intuitive brilliance that terrified opponents into submission. There was Tigran Petrosian, Iron Tigran, a defensive fortress so solid that attacking him was like punching a mountain. and Boris Spassky, the suave, universal player who would become one half of the most famous match in history. From 1948 until the Soviet Union's collapse, the World Championship was an almost exclusively internal affair. The only interruption was Bobby Fischer. The 1972 match of the century was the Cold War distilled onto a chessboard. When Fischer, the lone American genius, won, it was a cultural earthquake. The Soviets needed the title back, and the machine had the perfect man for the job. Enter Anatoly Karpov. Calm, positional, and relentlessly technical, he would malignant squeeze his opponents like a boa constrictor. An ethnic Russian and a loyal member of the Communist Party, he was the establishment's golden boy. Karpov became champion in 1975 after Fischer refused to defend. His reign was immediately defined by a series of incredibly bitter matches against Viktor Korchnoi, a brilliant grandmaster who had defected from the USSR in 1976. The Karpov-Korchnoi matches were pure Cold War theater. There were accusations of hypnotism, protests over the color of yogurt, and entourages that included parapsychologists and orange-robed gurus. It was less a chess match and more a spy novel novamente written by a madman. Karpov won and the Soviet establishment was relieved. But then the machine produced one last terrifyingly brilliant product. Enter Garry Kasparov. Fiery, aggressive, and fiercely independent, he was a force of nature, a new generation of battlefield, challenging the old guard. Their first match in 1984 was an epic of attrition. Karpov stormed to a 5-0 torrent lead. He needed one more win, but Kasparov dug in. After 48 games in 5 months, with both players visibly exhausted, the FIDE president controversially terminated the match without a result. The establishment, Kasparov claimed, was protecting its favorite son. But a new match in 1985, the 22-year-old Kasparov won, becoming the youngest world champion in history. Their titanic struggle wasn't just about chess. It was about the soul of the deemed a dirty Soviet empire. The loyal company man versus the dynamic individualistic upstart. In the end, the upstart won. Kasparov would reign until the year 2000, his career bridging the gap between the Soviet Union and the new Russia. The machine had built its own horizontally destroyer. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, so did the state funding for the chess machine. The pioneer palaces emptied out. The stipends vanished. A brain drain began as many of Russia's top coaches and players sought better opportunities in the West. Simultaneously, technology democratized the game. The Soviet advantage, a near monopoly on high-level analysis, was erased by powerful chess engines and online databases. The knowledge of the Botvinnik school was now available to any dedicated kid with a laptop. Russia is still a chess powerhouse. The cultural roots run deep. It continues to produce world-class players like Vladimir Kramnik, who dethroned Kasparov, and Ian Nepomniachtchi, a 2-time world championship challenger. But the dominance is gone. The world has caught up. The age of a single country producing champion after champion like an assembly line is over. The great Soviet machine has rusted, and yet the ghost remains. When you see men playing in a Moscow park today, you're not just seeing a hobby. You're seeing the living legacy of a time when a simple board game was elevated into a national project, a symbol of power, and an art form pursued with the ferocity of a religion. And that is a checkmate that history cannot reverse.